Okay, well, we're back at the dashboard and we're now ready to discuss in a little bit more detail the chart of accounts. So at this point, you should have already been playing around with the reconcile process of categorizing your transactions, and inevitably what's going to come up is you're going to encounter a situation that you may feel like the current chart of accounts doesn't adequately address. So maybe you want to customize the chart a little bit, or maybe you want to make a new account. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to settings and then to chart of accounts. And so if you haven't already, what I recommend you do is go into the chart of accounts that I've included with the course documents, and each of the accounts will have a description just like you see here that gives you a clue on what are all these accounts for. And what I'll say is, with the chart of accounts, nothing is set in stone. There's very few of these accounts that are non-negotiable. And what I mean is, particularly when it comes to expenses and when it comes to revenues, how you name those and how you categorize them and explain them is almost all for internal purposes. So it's to help you splice and dice your data so that you can get as much insight out of it as possible. So when it comes to advertising, I'd rather have a marketing account and an advertising account, or I've seen in several situations where people create multiple advertising accounts for, say, Facebook advertising versus Google AdWords advertising versus Amazon sponsored products advertising. So when it comes to the chart of accounts, it's totally customizable. What I've tried to do is give you a great base that covers all of the necessities, and then it gives you something to add on to. So the question becomes, well, how do you customize it and make it more to your liking? So what we do here is we need to make the distinction between bank accounts, which equal checking and savings accounts, credit cards, or PayPal accounts. Those are very unique types of accounts within the chart of accounts. Those are accounts that we would bring in feeds for, etc., which is very different from pretty much every other type of account, whether a revenue or an expense, an asset or a liability. Those will all be created under this Add Account button. So when I click that, what we'll see here is we have a few data boxes that we need to knock out. So the first one is, what type of account is this? I'll say most of the time you're probably going to be trying to customize expenses. So you just go ahead and click expense. And I'm not going to go into all the different account types. As a little tip here, you can see, well, how did my different account types, how did those flow through to my different reports? So like with the income statement, revenue and sales are at the top, direct costs are just below, and then you have other income and then expenses, etc. And so this will show you how choosing a different account type will flow into these different reports. The main ones are generally revenues, expenses, assets, and liabilities. So let's just say we wanted to make a new expense account type. And so we'll click expense, and then with a code, this is really for internal purposes, and there is a logic built into the existing account coding that you're using. But to be honest with you, it's not all that big of a deal. Go ahead and just pick a code. I usually try to pick a code around. So if advertising, let's see if we can come find, advertising is 600, I might make a new advertising account be something like 602. And so let's call this something like Google advertising. And so we've picked our account code. Now it's time to pick a name. This is, again, for internal purposes, whatever title is most meaningful for you. And then the description is optional of how you want this account to be used. And then we'll come down with a tax rate For you, all of the tax rates should be a 0%, so it ultimately doesn't matter if you pick tax on purchases 0% or tax on sales 0% or tax exempt. But go ahead and pick one of those. And then the final thing here is we need to decide whether we want to check these boxes or not. So the first one, as I briefly discussed on the account watch list and the dashboard, if we check this, this will flow through to our dashboard watch list. If I check this, this will make it an eligible location for expense claims. So when employees submit expenses, they can choose an account coding. Generally, I don't really mess with expense claims, so I leave that alone. And then the third thing is if we want to enable payments to this account. And what I'll say here is generally you don't want that checked. You would really only check that if you were going to use something like a clearing account. And you can go research clearing accounts if you want more info. I have a description of clearing accounts in the existing chart of accounts, but generally for most things, leave enabled payments alone. And really the only decision is whether or not you want to add it to the dashboard watch list. So let's say we want to add this to the dashboard. We'll click Save. And now all of a sudden, if I go down to 602, here we'll see Google Advertising. And now this account is eligible to be used in bills or in the cash coding screen or the reconcile screen. So that's the big idea with chart of accounts. You can customize it to your liking. If something is bothering you or you don't really use it anymore, you can always click it and then archive it to take it off of the list. You can also delete, of course. And really the only other things that you can do in this screen that you would want to use besides adding an account or a bank account or archiving is if you decide to change this down the line, you can import your chart of accounts as well as export. So go ahead and customize this down the road to your liking as you start to categorize expenses.